It's June 12th, 2016, shortly after 2 a.m. In a quiet bedroom in Orlando, Florida, Mina Justice is fast asleep. Her world is silent, safe, and still. But on her nightstand, a small screen flickers to life. A single notification pierces the darkness. It's a text from her 30-year-old son, Eddie. The message is short, simple, devastating. "Mommy, I love you." Before Mina can even process the words, a second one follows. "In club they shooting." In that moment, the distance between a mother's quiet bedroom and the strobe-lit chaos of the Pulse Nightclub vanishes. For the next 45 minutes, Mina becomes the only witness to her son's final struggle for survival. Through the blue light of her phone, she watches as Eddie retreats into a bathroom stall. She feels his breath hitch as he types the words, "I'm gonna die." And then, the final bone-chilling update. He has us. He's in the bathroom with us. Tonight, on 911, what's your emergency? We are not just looking at a crime scene. We are looking at a digital heartbeat. We are dissecting the final 45 minutes of Eddie Justice's life through the lens of a cell phone, a device that recorded the exact moment a sanctuary turned into a slaughterhouse. We are going inside the bathroom of the Pulse Nightclub to hear the voice of a killer who claimed to be a soldier and the silence of a mother who could only watch from the other side of a screen. Before we step into the shadows of that night, if stories like this stay with you, make sure you're subscribed. We tell these stories so they're never forgotten. And if there's a case you can't stop thinking about, leave it in the comments. It might be the next story we uncover. Now, let's step into the night it all began. Pulse Nightclub was not just another building on the Florida map. It was not just a place to drink or dance. It was a monument built out of a heartbeat. The club was established in 2004 by a woman named Barbara Poma, but she did not build it for profit. She built it for her brother, John, who had passed away in 1991 from complications related to HIV. Barbara wanted to create a space where John's spirit could live on, a place where the pulse of his life could still be felt by others. That is why she named it Pulse. It was meant to be a living, breathing memorial. For 12 years, Pulse was a sanctuary. In a world that could often be cold and judgmental, Pulse was a safe haven. It was a place where you did not have to look over your shoulder, a place where labels stayed outside at the velvet rope. Inside those walls, you were free, you were safe, you were home. The club was famous for its inclusivity. It was fully accessible for people with disabilities. It hosted charity events, educational workshops, and support groups. It was the beating heart of the community. June 11th, 2016 was Latin night. The atmosphere inside was electric. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, hairspray, and sweat. Over 300 people were packed onto the main dance floor, moving as one body, to the rhythm of reggaeton and salsa. Among them was Eddie Justice, a 30-year-old accountant, a man who loved his mother, a man who just wanted to enjoy his Saturday night. By 2 a.m., the night was reaching its peak. The DJ announced the last call. The lights were about to come up. People were laughing, closing their tabs, and saying their goodbyes. Outside, the Orlando night was warm. Ubers were pulling up to the curb. Everything seemed perfect. And then, a sound cut through the heavy bass of the music. Nigga put here gun sounds. At first, nobody hit the floor. In a club full of strobe lights and massive speakers, the human brain tries to protect itself. It tries to find a logical explanation for the noise. People thought it was part of the show. Maybe firecrackers, maybe special effects, or a speaker blowing out under the pressure of the bass. But then, the music stopped. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound of all. The smell of ozone and gunpowder replaced the sweet scent of perfume. And then, the screaming began, in a matter of seconds. The safe haven transformed into a labyrinth of shadows. The pulse of the club did not stop. It began to race, faster than ever before. The killer was not a stranger to the area. Omar Mateen, a 29-year-old security guard, had been sitting in his van outside, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He walked into the club armed with a semi-automatic rifle and a handgun. He did not come to rob the place. He did not come for money. He came to erase the pulse. As the first victims fell near the entrance, the crowd in the back of the club was still confused. Some people continued to dance for a few more seconds, unaware that a massacre had started just 20 feet away. But as Mateen moved deeper into the lounge, the reality set in. This was not a drill. This was not a performance. This was the end of the world for 49 people. As the gunman, armed with a Sig Sauer rifle, moved deeper into the lounge, the crowd splintered. In the darkness and the smoke, the path to the main exits was a wall of fire and lead. Some managed to burst through the back doors, spilling out into the warm Orlando night. But for dozens of others, the exits were blocked. They were forced to run deeper into the building. They ran for the only place that felt like a shield, the bathrooms. Eddie Justice scrambled into a handicap-accessible stall. He was not alone. Nearly 20 other terrified strangers packed themselves into that small tiled square. They were shoulder to shoulder, heart against heart, holding their breath so tightly it hurt. In that moment, the bathroom was a sanctuary, but as the sound of the heavy boots approached the door, it became a cage. This is where the digital record of the night becomes a masterpiece of horror. While huddled on the cold, wet floor, Eddie pulled out his phone. He was not calling for a ride anymore. He was texting his mother, Mina. "Mommy, I love you. In club they shooting." Pause 5 seconds. Think about the silence in that room. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic tapping of thumbs on glass, the soft blue glow of dozens of screens lighting up the terrified faces of the trapped. Mina replied from her bed miles away. She asked if he was okay. She asked where he was. Eddie's fingers moved across the screen one more time. "I'm gonna die." As the killer entered the bathroom, he did not rush. He was methodical. He began firing through the thin, particle-board walls of the stalls. Those walls offered zero protection. They were meant for privacy, not for war. The sound in that bathroom was a symphony of absolute terror. The metallic clatter of shell casings hitting the ceramic floor, the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots, and then there was the chirping. Dozens of cell phones began to ring in the pockets of people who could no longer answer them. Mothers, fathers, and friends were watching the news and dialing, their voices vibrating in a room filled with blood and silence. The gunman became enraged by the noise. He shouted at the survivors to turn off their phones, to stay silent, to accept their fate. In that stall, surrounded by the dying, Eddie Justice sent his final message. "He has us. He's in the bathroom with us." For the next 3 hours, that bathroom would not be a shelter. It would be a tomb. The water pipes had burst from the constant gunfire, and the floor began to flood. A mixture of cold water and blood began to rise. survivors, many of them bleeding from multiple wounds, had to lift their faces just to keep from drowning in the pool. They were trapped in a cage of porcelain and tile, waiting for a miracle that felt like it would never come, while the man with the gun stood just inches away, deciding who would be next. While the survivors in the bathroom were fighting to stay silent, fighting to keep their breath from betraying them, the man holding the weapon was doing the exact opposite. Shortly after 2:30 a.m., Omar Mateen did something that few spree killers ever do. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his own phone, and he dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, they expected to hear a victim pleading for their life. Instead, they heard a voice that was chillingly calm. Mateen did not sound like a man in the middle of a massacre. He did not sound like a man surrounded by the dying. He sounded like a man giving a professional report, like a soldier calling in from a battlefield he had already won. He began by speaking in Arabic, reciting religious formulas, before switching to English to make his final, terrifying declaration. I want to let you know, I am in Orlando, and I did the shootings. When the operator asked for his name, he refused. He did not want to be a man. He wanted to be a symbol. He pledged his allegiance to the leaders of a foreign terror group. He told the negotiators that he had vehicles outside filled with explosives. He claimed he had suicide vests and that he was prepared to strap them onto the hostages at any moment. It was a psychological game, a masterpiece of manipulation. For the next 3 hours, the police were paralyzed by the uncertainty. They had to treat every word as a real threat, while the bomb squads were checking the perimeter, while the negotiators were trying to keep him talking. The victims in the bathroom were slowly, quietly, bleeding out. This was the true agony of the Pulse standoff. The killer was not just using a gun, he was using the system against itself. He turned a mass shooting into a siege. Inside that club, during the long gaps between the gunfire, he spent his time scrolling through Facebook. He was checking the news, searching for his own name, watching to see if his face was trending on the world stage. He even sent a text to his wife, a simple question, asking if she had seen the headlines yet. He wanted the world to watch him. He wanted to be the center of the storm, and for 3 long hours, the world had no choice but to wait in the dark. But as the clock ticked toward 5 a.m., the tone of the conversation changed. The killer stopped talking about his mission and started talking about the end. The negotiators realized that time had run out. Mateen was no longer interested in talking. He was preparing for one final, bloody act of violence. The pulse was fading, and the police knew they had to move, now. By 5 a.m., the situation inside the bathroom had reached a breaking point. The air was thick and heavy, with the smell of copper and unwashed fear. The negotiators realized that Omar Mateen was no longer interested in talking. He was no longer making demands. He was preparing for a final and bloody act of defiance. Reports were filtering out from the survivors inside. Whispers reached the police that the killer was preparing to execute the remaining hostages one by one in the dark. The time for talking had ended. The order was given, a single word that changed everything. Go. The SWAT teams did not use the front doors. They did not walk through the main entrance where the bodies lay. Instead, they used a massive 10-ton armored vehicle called a Bearcat. The plan was simple and violent. They would use the vehicle as a battering ram to tear a hole directly through the exterior wall of the bathroom. The impact was deafening. The sound of concrete and steel and tile all crumbling under the weight of the machine shook the entire block. Inside the bathroom, the world was falling apart. The impact from the Bearcat had severed the main water lines. The pipes burst, and high-pressure water began to spray everywhere. The floor, which was already covered in the blood of the victims, was now a rising pool of freezing and murky water. Survivors who were too weak to stand, and people who had been lying on the floor for 3 hours, had to lift their faces just to keep from drowning in the flood. They were caught between the fire of the gunmen and the rising tide of the water. Through the dust and the debris of the shattered wall, the officer shouted for the hostages to get down, to stay low. Omar Mateen emerged from the shadows of the stalls. He did not surrender. He did not drop his weapon. He stepped through the rubble, firing his rifle until the very last second of his life. The exchange of gunfire was absolute chaos. Over 150 rounds were fired in those final and desperate seconds of the battle. When the smoke finally cleared, the terror was dead, but the victory was hollow. As the officers began to pull survivors through the hole in the wall, they saw the true scale of what had happened in that small and tiled room. 49 lives had been extinguished, 49 pulses that would never beat again. The safe haven was gone. All that remained was the sound of the running water and the smell of the gunpowder. And in the darkness, the thousands of unread notifications were still lighting up the screens of the phones lying on the wet floor. Mina Justice was still at home. She was still watching her phone. She was still waiting for a reply that would never come. The sun rose over Orlando, but the city would never look the same. As the crime scene tape stretched around Pulse, a different kind of silence settled over the streets. Not the silence of peace, the silence of a void that couldn't be filled. 49 lives, 49 stories, cut short in the middle of a sentence. In the days that followed, the world began to learn their names. Eddie Justice, who spent his final moments making sure his mother knew he loved her. The dancers, the students, the dreamers who came to Pulse that night because it was the one place they felt free. In the pockets of the victims and on the screens of their families, a record of that night remained. Text messages that would never be read. Calls that would never be answered. Every time a phone vibrated on that floor, it was a reminder of a connection that had just been severed forever. The building is gone, but the heartbeat remains. The site stands today as a memorial. Flowers, flags, messages written by strangers who never met the 49 but felt the weight of losing them anyway. One man brought hate into that building. Thousands more responded with love. That is the part of this story that doesn't make the headlines, but that matters the most. We tell these stories so the names are never forgotten. If this case stayed with you, consider subscribing to the channel and drop a comment below with the case you want us to cover next. It might just be our next one. If one video isn't enough for tonight, there is another one on your screen right now. Until next time, stay safe. Good night.